The journey was endless. She could tell that Brian sensed that she was upset, but he had no idea what it all meant. She knew that he could not imagine what happened in that cave during the storm. It was unthinkable. She herself could hardly believe it. Allender has never been promiscuous. She had been with 3 men before Brian, all of them in long-term relationships, and now her weakness and stupidity were eating her alive. Why did she let this happen? This question haunted her every minute. They unpacked their things, and he sat in the living room, checking his email. She poured 2 glasses of good whiskey and sat down next to him. "Brian, I have to tell you something," she said calmly. He closed the computer and leaned back against the pillows. "Okay, shoot," he said. "I know something is bothering you." "I did something terrible there," she said. The story spilled out, and she felt shame and burning guilt envelop her like a shroud. She saw that he was in great pain and spared him details that could have caused him even more pain. Tears streamed down his cheeks, and she wanted to brush them away and take the pain upon herself. She barely controlled herself and held herself in an iron grip, trying to retell this sordid story in a calm and dispassionate voice, as if it were a story written by someone else about a long time ago. "We have 2 paths before us," she said. "If you want to divorce me, I will go and pack my things. I know this is what I deserve. I won't complain or whine. I'm not going to insult you by begging, although that's what I'd like to do. I will sign whatever you decide. I won't dispute anything. I'll leave and never bother you again if that's what you want." "Okay," he said. Allender's heart sank like a stone in her chest. Without another word, she stood up and began to pull out her suitcases. "What are you doing?" "I'm packing my things. Didn't I understand you correctly?" "No, I just agreed with you," he said. "You still haven't indicated the second path." She returned and took a sip of whiskey, feeling the warmth burn her. "He's not going anywhere," she said. "The second way is not to go anywhere. You will forgive me, I will repent, and we will remain married. You grant me forgiveness. I know I don't deserve this, but this is what I want. I know this will be hard and I don't deserve your forgiveness. I have no right to expect this. Are you in love with Rains?" "God, no," she said. "I barely know this man. I plan to never see him or hear his name again. This will happen no matter what you decide. I love you, Brian. You are the only man I can ever love. It's true no matter what you decide. If I divorce you, what will you do?" "I think I'll move to Canada," she said. "I always wanted to live there. This is an athlete's paradise. I'll buy myself a little hut somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Maybe Dad will come and help me get started." Brian lay motionless, and only the rocking of the drink in the glass indicated that he was alive. He didn't say anything for a long time. "No, I'm not going to divorce you, Allender. I don't want to say or do anything that I'll regret later, but I want you to leave. I don't think I can be around you for a while. Maybe I'll survive this. Maybe I won't. Yes, I believe that you don't love him and don't want to see or hear about him. But can you forget him? I'm afraid this question will torment me all my life. If I manage to survive, if what you say is true and you won't be with another man, waiting for me to get over all this." "Oh, I'm pretty sure it's true," she said. "Obviously, I can't make any promises that you can believe in, but I think you'll see the evidence." "What happened?" "I didn't plan anything like this, Brian. And you know it." "Yes, I know, Allender. It doesn't matter to me now. I'm grateful that you're alive. I hate what you did. I hate you right now. Please go away. Let me know where you're staying." Allender packed her clothes into suitcases. Her brain was paralyzed as she was mechanically packed. She needed a box for her personal belongings and walked through the living room into the garage. Brian didn't move, and she could see the tears shining on his face. Her heart was breaking. She could almost hear the sound. She managed to pull herself together until she ended up in the garage. She collapsed onto the workbench, the shreds of self-control gone, and she sobbed. Her hand was resting on something, and she looked down at the tool belt she had given him for his birthday. Her fingers felt the belt, and she was lost in a storm of grief and longing. She didn't know how long she sat there sobbing, but the grief began to recede, and a terrible rage began to overwhelm her. Rage at herself, at Rains, at the storm, at everything that had come together to end all her dreams, all her ideas of own dignity and worth as a person. She was a dirty little girl, and now she knew that about herself. There was no coming back from this. Her self-loathing grew until she felt the depths of despair. What she did to the man she loved, sitting there with tears in his eyes, was unforgivable. He loved her and she failed. It was the worst possible failure and she was broken. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Her weapon rack hung on the wall. She absorbed the beauty of these instruments of destruction. It seemed fitting that she should end her pain with something she enjoyed so much. She stood up and removed her vintage Browning Sweet 16 from its padded hooks. She opened the chamber and rummaged through the drawer for buckshot. Having found it, she inserted it into the chamber. "Allender?" Brian's voice made her shudder. "What are you doing? No, you shouldn't do that. You can't run away and leave me in this. You can't take the cheap way out. What are you trying to do? Ruin my life forever? Don't be a coward. You have never been a coward. Face the mess you've made and fix it. What the hell is wrong with you? What happened to the girl I married?" She turned to face him. "She's lost, Brian," she sobbed. "She's broken and doesn't know how to move on." "I'm so afraid. What should I do now?" "I don't know," he said. "Not this. Promise me that when you leave, you won't do this. Find yourself, Allender. When you do, let me know. Put the gun down." Allender took a deep, shuddering breath. "I promise, Brian." She didn't put the gun down. "No, I take it with me to remember. I need all my stuff, Brian. These things are part of who I used to be. I'll pack them tomorrow and send them to wherever you are," he said. He turned slowly and walked back into the house. Allender put the Browning in its case and carried it to her car. She took the box she came for, carried it upstairs, packed her personal belongings, and put them in the car. She walked into her office one last time, grabbed her laptop and a photo of Brian. She locked the front door behind her and headed west. She had no idea where she was going, but she knew it would be far. A couple of hours later, she called Brian and asked him to pack her things into boxes and leave them in the garage until she decided where she was going. 3 days later, she was in Winthrop, Washington. She saw a sign with the name of the town of Conconuli and felt a connection. It was a quaint little town accessible only by snowmobile in the winter, and Allender fell in love with it. There was a shop for rent with an apartment above it, and she settled into it. She sent Brian her address, and her things arrived 2 weeks later. Allender was well off financially and spent a month just getting to know the area and the local people. She discovered that she could rent large tracts of land for hunting and fishing. She opened a guide service, and by the time summer arrived, she had her first clients. They fished for trout, and she really enjoyed the job. She felt good physically, but inside, she felt dead. Her heart was damaged, and she spent time alone whenever possible. She cried at night, every night, and began to think that she would never be happy again. She was amazed that one 6-hour period of life could cause such destruction. She wrote to Brian once a week, and he always replied. As Brian watched Allender leave the house, he could barely stop himself from running after her and begging her to stay. She looked so small and broken and alone that it broke his heart. He managed to restrain himself. This was the only way forward. Allender needed to rediscover her inner strength, and she had to do it herself. They would sort out the issues between them when she was safe and sound. He was desperately afraid that, in her despair, she would forget about her promise and commit suicide, but he knew that she honestly kept her promises and hoped so. It had always been this way, except for one occasion, and it was this broken promise that left her an empty shell of herself. He hoped time would heal her. When she called him and asked for her things to be delivered to her, he knew she was on the mend. Having got rid of this burden of worries, he soon turned to other thoughts. He knew how it happened. Extraordinary circumstances took her beyond normal reactions. He knew that men were constantly pestering her. It had always been this way, and he had watched more than once how she dealt with it. He even saw her become furious when several guys refused to take no for an answer. Allender could turn into a tiger when she was touched, and he saw her break the arm of a man who groped her in the club lobby near the toilet. Has she really changed so much that she just now allowed something similar to what happened? Was all that was required for her character to collapse was the appropriate set of circumstances? If this is so, then they have no future with her. How would he know? The main question running through his head was, what was he going to do with Rains? What will Allender do if she meets this man again? His first reaction was that Rains needed to be punished. He wasn't sure how he would manage it, but this man was unscrupulous, unprofessional, and he, in Brian's opinion, basically took advantage of Allender's vulnerable state and raped her. Yes, she was an active participant, but in her weakened state, she probably couldn't function as well as she normally did. He cursed himself for failing to protect her. If he had been just a little careful and gone with her, none of this would have happened. He didn't take any blame for the act, but he was less than vigilant. He had no doubt in his ability to get Rains to pay back. The man was big and tough, but he lacked discipline, and Brian was big and tough himself. He was a high school and collegiate wrestler and knew his physical limitations. He also knew he could go to jail if he attacked Rains. It had to be something radical that would not allow for a counterstrike. Father Allender was due to visit soon. How will he explain this to Thomas? Isn't your daughter here because I kicked her out? She's a cheater and I can't live with her? She froze to death and a man took advantage of her and had sex with her, so I sent her away? He didn't want to tell Thomas any of this. Thomas was a man of the old school. He was a retired aerospace engineer and the person Brian respected more than anyone in the world. Brian was desperate for his approval, and he didn't want to explain the situation. But he decided that honesty was the best policy, and tried to come up with an explanation. He knew that Allender had not communicated with her father, and this would be a real shock for Thomas. Brian met Thomas at the airport, and the old man kept looking around, clearly expecting to see his daughter. It broke Brian's heart to think that this good old gentleman would be disappointed. He invited Thomas to Cheddar's for lunch, and told him that Allender had left. "What do you mean, gone?" asked Thomas. "Where is she? And why didn't any of you bother to call me and tell me she wouldn't be here?" "To be honest, it's probably because we didn't want you to know," Brian said. "It's a long story, so get ready." The long, painful story spilled out, and Thomas listened in shock as the sordid tale unfolded. There was silence when Brian finished. The tension eased with the arrival of the waiter, and Thomas ordered bourbon for both of them. "I don't know about you, but I wouldn't mind having a drink," he said. They sipped their wine in silence for a while, and finally Thomas spoke. "Brian, I can't even express how disappointed I am in my daughter. I'm so sorry that I failed you both as a father. I can't imagine how you feel right now, and I will do everything in my power to help you. You must also understand that she is my daughter and I love her with all my heart, and I always will. I will express my disappointment to her the first time we meet. Then I will forgive her and still love her. My love for her does not depend on whether she is perfect or even good. I love her not because she makes me proud or because she is perfect. I love her because she is my daughter. I love her for who she is, not what she does." "I understand, sir," Brian said. "I didn't expect anything else." "So what are you going to do?" asked Thomas. "This situation is unbearable. This problem needs to be solved." "I was hoping you could tell me how to do this," Brian said. "Take me home and let me sleep," Thomas said. They ate dinner very gloomily in silence. They went to bed, and Thomas lay awake, thinking all night. He got up at 6 and prepared breakfast. When Brian got up at 7, everything was ready, and they talked over a cup of coffee. "As far as I understand," Thomas explained, "you have very few options. You don't know what Allender is thinking. You may think you don't know her at all. I believe that what happened is so out of character for her that she is broken inside because of it. 5 months have passed, and maybe she has found her way back. She hasn't told you this, but she may be waiting for something that none of us understands. I've decided that the only way back or forward for you two is a test. She will either pass the exam or fail. In any case, there will be a result. Do you think she's ready?" "I have no idea," Brian answered. "What kind of test?" Let's see. I think I've thought about it, Thomas said. From the way you described this Rains guy, I think he would jump at the opportunity to take a second shot at her. I think we should arrange this. Jesus Christ, Thomas, Brian said. Are you crazy? That's the last thing I want. You have no idea how many times I dreamed of killing that bastard. I don't want her near him. Yes, I understand, said Thomas. But the real problem is that you have no idea how she will react if she gets into trouble again. That's the crux of the problem. I think you should inform him through some third party that you have broken up. If he's as predatory as we think he is, he'll jump at the chance. If he doesn't react, it means we underestimated him. If he does, he'll be fair game. He will find Allender, and we will see how she reacts. If she closes it, we'll know it was a deviation. If she doesn't, we'll know she has some deeper character flaw, and you need to move on and leave her to me. Brian thought for a moment. This is damn risky, he said. What if he tracks her? Brian, I've hunted on 5 continents. You are very good yourself. We'll be watching her like hawks. I'll kill that bastard myself if he does any harm to her. You figure out how to get the message to him, and I'll plan the rest. 2 weeks later, Peter Thompson and Rains Parker were having dinner together at their base camp. Tell Parker, Peter spoke. Do you remember that cute couple that was here 6 months ago? Their names were Brian and Allender Celine. They both took the moose and you were stuck with her for a while. She was very hot. Do you remember? Parker looked at Peter but didn't say anything. The boss said they broke up, Peter said. This is a real shame. I thought they really loved each other. Do you know anything about this, Parker? Rains blushed. What are you suggesting? I'm not hinting at anything, said Peter. I'm asking you directly. Do you have anything to do with their breakup? Can you confess like a man? I think your face says it all. Talk to me like that again and I'll rip you in half, Rains growled. Ha! Peter laughed. Just try to attack me and I will kill you like a dog. Having sex with a client. Did you get her drunk? She was cold and you offered to warm her up? Look at you, you damn sneak, right? She froze, and you took advantage of her. You son of a bitch. He pulled out a pistol. No, sit back down. I'm leaving. I won't work with a dog like you. Thank God your daddy isn't around to see what a piece of crap he raised. I'll tell the boss what happened. He backed away from the camp, and Rains heard the patter of his horse coming down the path. He didn't care what Thompson thought. All his mind caught was that Brian and Allender had broken up. He still thought about her, every day. Her gorgeous face, the way those large breasts pressed against his chest, the look of ecstasy on her face, the sound of her voice and the impact of her personality. He had never wanted a woman more in his life. He dated hundreds of women during his football glory days, but none impressed him as much as Allender. He was going to find her and claim her as his own. Allender was working on her longbow. She made a layered bow using hickory backing and bois d'arc wood. It was a huge weapon, 79 inches long, and it weighed enormously. She practiced this art. She wanted it to be not only functional, but also beautiful. She was very proud of it. Someone knocked downstairs and she went to open it. It was one of her neighbors. Lars was a born boy. That was the only way to describe him. She felt he was a free spirit, something of a throwback to the hippies, and she liked him. What she didn't like was his persistent attempts to get her to go on a date with him. Hello, Allender, he greeted. I was wondering if you wanted to go get something to eat. I'm busy, Lars. I'm working on the bow. You need to eat. Why do you always tell me you're busy? When are you not busy? Listen, Lars, she said impatiently. I like you, okay? You are a very handsome guy. You shouldn't have any problems getting dates. Why do you keep asking me? I'll always be busy. This has nothing to do with you. Have you seen me date men? You haven't seen this and won't see it. I won't go anywhere with you. And if you don't stop bothering me, we won't even stop being friends. Do you understand? Why don't you want to come with me? He began to argue, but Allender heard her phone ringing upstairs. I have to answer the phone. She closed the door in his face. Her phone went to voicemail when she found it. It was under the coat she had worn before, and she didn't recognize the number. Her blood froze when she heard Rain's voice. "Hello, Allender," she heard. "I know that I promised you never to remind me of me again. I heard that you and Brian are no longer together. I'm really sorry if this has anything to do with me. The point is, if you're not with Brian, I'd like to see you. I don't know where you are, but I have this number. Please call me. I need to see you." Allender dropped her phone. The memory of what they had done came flooding back. She remembered the excitement and painful pleasure. She also felt shame and guilt wash over her as if it all happened yesterday. Damn this man. She was trying to figure out her life, and now this. She wasn't going to answer his call. She came to terms with the weakness that had taken over her then and the way her body reacted to him. It was hard to accept, but she knew she had a deep character flaw that she needed to constantly be wary of. She didn't quite understand how she could have lost control of herself, but she knew how to prevent it from happening again. Now Rains was invading her life again, unwanted and hostile to everything she had ever hoped to have in her life. She returned to her bow. A million thoughts raced through her head as she ran through ideas. She had some plans. A good night's sleep would be a good start, and Allender went to bed in full accordance with her plan. The next morning she got up early, ate a hearty breakfast, and packed everything she was going to take with her into the car. While driving through Yakima, she traded her car for a four-wheel drive truck. The longbow was in a case along with arrows. It had a draw length of 30 inches and the arrows were 2 inches longer. She was going to use 125 grit Woodman Whiteheads, and they came in a case too. She packed her things and headed southeast to Colorado. Brian and Thomas looked after her. They watched her for a whole week, not knowing whether Parker would call her or not. When they saw her start packing, their hearts sank. Brian watched her carefully through binoculars and saw the suitcase she had packed. There seemed to be a fishing rod there, but he couldn't figure out why she'd brought it with her. She and Thomas followed in a rented car and took turns sleeping and driving. Allender hurried as fast as she could, and when she finally stopped, they took turns sleeping in the car. She slept for 10 hours and went to McDonald's for breakfast. It became clear where she was going with this, and Brian wanted to leave. "She's coming to him, Thomas. I don't want to see this. I'm over it." "Stop being so small," Thomas told him. "Grow some balls, boy. I'll cripple this son of a bitch, and you help me." They were somewhat surprised when Allender turned off the highway and entered the forest. They watched as she hid her truck behind some bushes and pulled out something. She had a strange suitcase with her, and the two men quickly packed the camping supplies they had brought with them. Thomas packed his rifles and they headed into the forest, following Allender. She was heading back to the place where the nightmare began, and she was in a hurry. It took them 2 days to get there, and when they got there were no signs of life. Allender cautiously approached the camp and looked around. It had only recently been used, and she assumed that Peter and Rains had gone to investigate. She walked up the path she had used before and saw that the horses' tracks had turned. She moved with caution now, stopping to scan the area with her binoculars before continuing. She followed the horse's trail for 5 miles and smelled smoke. As she approached, she noticed him and cautiously moved forward. Brian and Thomas realized that she was tracking something and silently crept closer. They watched Allender take a bow from its case and draw it. She tipped 4 arrows and placed one on the string. "Crap," Brian whispered to Thomas. "She's going to shoot that son of a bitch." They saw Rains sitting with his back against a large pine tree, eating an apple. They crept closer when Allender was within range. She stayed in cover between herself and Rains until she had a chance to get a good shot. "Should we stop her?" Brian whispered. "Let him play," said Thomas. "This is her show. She must solve this problem." Allender stood up slowly. Rains heard a sound like a bird flying and felt a strong blow to his right shoulder. Excruciating pain shot through his body, and he realized that he was pinned to a pine tree by the longest arrow he had ever seen. He heard the sound again, and before he could react, he was hit in the other shoulder. His world went dark. Water splashed on his face and he regained consciousness, spitting. He was in agony. When his eyes focused, he saw Allender pouring bottled water on his head. He hissed, and she knelt before him. "Hi, Rains," she said. "You shot at me." All he could squeeze out was a hoarse croak. "Yes," she smiled sadly. "Twice. I'm going to shoot you." "What the hell is wrong with you?" He wheezed. "Are you going to kill me?" "Yes, as promised." Her voice was level. "You ruined my life, Rains. You destroyed me. I helped you do it, but I'm better now. I realize that you won't let me move on. You will always be there, like a snake, crawling around my garden and stopping me from becoming who I once was again. For 6 hours, I was also a snake. Then I realized that I am not a snake. I'm taking my life back, Rains. You're losing yours." He looked into her eyes and saw his death. "Please," he managed. "I will never contact you again." "I never liked the word connection, used as a verb," said a male voice. "Another blow to you, Allender. It also seems to me that this promise has been made before. It was a fiction then, and I suspect, a fiction now." Allender rolled to the side, and when she got up, she was holding a very nasty-looking .40 caliber pistol in her hands. It was aimed at a man who approached her from behind. "Dad!" she exclaimed. "What are you doing? How did you find—" She rushed to him, hugged him, and sobbed in his coat. "I brought someone with me," he muttered. Allender raised her head and saw Brian appear from behind the rock. "Oh, God," she sobbed. She ran for what seemed like miles. She ran to her husband. All other thoughts disappeared. Brian was here. He walked up to her and hugged her, and she sobbed hysterically on his chest. "Are you going to shoot me?" he asked. She glanced at the gun pressed between them to his heart. She threw it away as Brian smiled sadly at her. "Hey, baby," he said. "You're in quite a difficult situation." "What were you going to do with him, Allender?" he asked, nodding towards the unconscious Parker. "I was going to shoot the arrow between these two, right in the center." "I can't let you do this," he told her. "What do we do?" she asked. "You two are going home," Thomas said. "I'll take out the trash. I'll arrive in a couple of weeks. Will you be there?" Allender looked at Brian hopefully. He nodded. "Come to Concanully," said Allender. "I think we need to take a break from everything for a while." Thomas nodded and watched as his daughter and son-in-law disappeared into the forest, hugging each other, the sound of their voices mingling and fading. He smiled. Everything should work. They walked about a mile when they heard 2 shots. They looked at each other. Brian raised an eyebrow and Allender sighed. They headed down the path. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.